Peru, police repression left 20 people killed so far after the executive headed by Dina Boluarte and the Congress reached an agreement to decree a curfew. Railway workers in the United Kingdom started the second 48-hour strike to demand a 7% wage increase to mitigate inflation. And the UN General Assembly ratified the self-determination of the Palestinian people. Hello and welcome to teleSUR English. I am Estefania Bravo from the headquarters of Quito in Ecuador. This is from the south. After the 30-day state of emergency decreed by Dina Boluarte's government on Wednesday, the death toll in Peru has risen to 21 so far. The measure suspends the right to gather and move freely across the entire country and comes just before the Christmas holidays when people typically travel extensively to visit their families. The declaration also empowers the police to search people's homes without permission or judicial order. A curfew has also been imposed in 15 countries. And former Peruvian Health Minister Hernando Ceballos said that Dina Boluarte's government lacks legitimacy and called it a dictatorship.
The government of Dina Boluarte is totally delegitimized, and we could classify it as a dictatorship because it is not following the most elementary norms of respect for human rights. Mrs. Boluarte should have first summoned the different sectors to talk about a possible solution, to learn about people's concerns, who are demanding to close Congress and saying that she is here on a provisional basis and should go home. And it is necessary to produce profound changes in the country, in the constitutional framing and through a constitutional assembly. And Dina Boluarte does not listen to that. It seems that she is very arrogant in power.
And Peru's former health minister also said that former President Pedro Castillo was transferred to a prison without respect for his rights.
I believe that the president has been mistreated and is being mistreated. If something had to be investigated, it had to be investigated, but he has been treated in the worst way, without respect for his investiture, without a pre-trial. It seems to me that these things must have affected him personally, besides the other situations he has to face.
Ceballos also stated that former head of state Pedro Castillo was removed from office because his policies affected the interests of the social elites.
It's an issue that has to do with class, but also with race. Pedro Castillo is the one that raises a series of slogans and proposals that affect the interests of the power groups in this country, and that is something they don't forgive him for.
And meanwhile, the Ministers of Education, Patricia Correa, and Culture, Jair Perez, officially handed in their resignations in rejection of the violent events that occurred during the social protests in the country. The now ex-officials commented that their decisions were in response to the high number of deaths caused by the security forces. And the Peruvian Congress did not approve the constitutional reform that establishes the 2023 general election process with 49 votes in favor, 33 against, and 25 abstentions. The legislators rejected the constitutional reform bill for early elections. And a group of students in the Peruvian department of Ayacucho also mobilized to reject the violence exercised by the government against the social protests in the country and to pay tribute to those who died in the demonstrations. And in Venezuela, a rally was held on Friday in the framework of the trial for the diplomatic immunity of Alex Saab, who has been kidnapped by the government of the U.S. for the past 2 years. The event was organized by Free Alex Saab movement and took place in the vicinity of the Venezuelan National Embassy. During the meeting, several deputies and social organizations expressed their support to the diplomat and rejected the kidnapping planned by the government of the U.S. In an extraordinary session, the Venezuelan parliament approved an agreement to support Saab and recalled the work that allowed to bring aid and food to the families in the middle of the blockade against the country. We're taking our first break now. Join us again after this, and also don't forget to follow us on our TikTok account at teleSUR English for more. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. In Argentina, the National Supreme Court of Justice has confirmed the 13-year prison sentence for the social leader of Tupac Amaru organization Milagro Sala in the case called Pibes Villeros, in which she was falsely accused of illicit association to defraud the state. Let's see the repercussions of the judicial decision in the following report.
Leaders of different political forces, social movements, and worker organizations strongly rejected the actions of the highest court of justice.
This is what's going to happen with Cristina as well, and that is what is going to happen with each one of the victims of lawfare in our country. Because today, justice is nothing but the instrument the U.S. Embassy is using to implement its political projects. So as long as we cannot fight neoliberalism, we cannot fight financial capital on equal ground, as long as we don't fight the agricultural multinational economic model, we will be tormented by lawfare. My respects to Milagro, my respects to all our comrades of Tupac Amaru. Unfortunately, if we do not democratize justice, this is what's coming for many men and women in our country.
Political prisoner, persecuted and illegally imprisoned, this ruling against Milagro Sala by the court of Jujuy demonstrates once again the lack of justice in Argentina.
This Macri-sympathizing Supreme Court of Justice is garbage, ratifying the justice of Morales, which unfortunately is the worst case of political persecution we have in the whole Argentinian Republic. 6 years in prison, no charges, only lies, falsely accused by powers that are absolutely bent to Governor Morales, and today ratified by this Macri-sympathizing Supreme Court.
The parastatal power, made up of big media, judges, prosecutors, former intelligence agents, also defines the lives of all Argentinians.
45 years ago, they perpetrated the Condor Plan. They murdered 600,000 Latin Americans. 45 years later, instead of using the military, they're using judges and with the same economic objectives of domination and persecution. Before, they used to cut off lives. Now they cut off people's freedom.
For this reason, Tupac Amaru, together with other sectors and organizations, will announce a plan to put an end to lawfare flagrant violation of rights, which they constantly denounce.
Carolina Silvestre, teleSUR, Buenos Aires.
On Thursday night, the United States Congress passed the annual defense authorization bill worth more than $800 million. The U.S. Senate approved the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2023 and sent it to the White House for signature a week after it went through the House of Representatives. The NDAA authorities and more than $800 million for the Pentagon and $30.3 billion for national security programs within the U.S. Department of Energy. And according to data published by the United States Commerce Department, retail sales dropped in November, falling even lower than analysts had estimated. Retail sales decreased 0.6%, and it is the largest fall since December 2021 and surpassed the Dow Jones prediction of 0.3% decline. Consumers pulled back on spending in several retail sectors. Furniture saw a 2.6% drop. Garden centers and building materials ticketed down 2.5%, and auto dealers and auto parts sellers saw a 2.3% fall. Online retail sales also ticketed downward, dropping 0.9%. Railway workers in the United Kingdom began on Friday the second 48-hour strike this week to demand a 7% wage increase to mitigate inflation. Members of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Union are trying to force negotiations with their employers Network Rail after a failed attempt that led them to halt services last Tuesday and Wednesday. The company offered a 0.5% increase to the workers, but this is insufficient in the opinion of the union members, who are demanding at least a 7% wage adjustment, alleging that inflation in the country is at 10%. And the European Union passed on Friday a series of new sanctions against Russia. The European Union on Friday approved the 9th series of sanctions against the country over the special military operation in Ukraine. It enforces new trade, technological and financial restrictions. Similarly, the new set of coercive measures included the ban of European citizens from holding executive positions in Russian state-owned companies, in addition to canceling the licenses of 4 Russian state television channels. The Parliament of Slovakia has approved a no-confidence vote against Prime Minister Edward Heger. The motion was introduced by the Freedom and Solidarity Party. The initiative passed with 78 votes, 2 more than was needed. 20 parliament members opposed the motion and another 2 abstained. Slovak Parliament President Boris Kolar said following the endorsement of this motion against Slovak Prime Minister Heger, it would be possible to call for early elections, which could be held between May and June of 2023. On Friday, Serbia has formally requested NATO to deploy troops in Kosovo on the grounds of protecting the safety of its citizens. According to local media, the authorities have sent the request to the commander of the NATO mission for Kosovo to deploy 1,000 members of its army and police in agreement with the UN Security Council Resolution 1244. The Serbian executive said the measure was unanimously approved, and he emphasized that it is an important decision for the security of Kosovo Serb citizens. Russian assets frozen by Hungary's government, which has repeatedly stalled European Union sanctions against Moscow, rose to $925 million by the end of November from a previously reported $3,000. According to the Hungarian newspaper Népszava, nearly 19 billion euros linked to Russian individuals under sanctions have been frozen by the end of November in the EU member states. Due to conflict in Ukraine, the European Union has so far introduced punitive measures against more than 1,000 individuals and 118 organizations, which include frozen assets and imposed travel bans. We're taking one last short break now. Join us again after this. And also don't forget to follow me on my Twitter at teleSUR for more. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. The General Assembly of the United Nations ratified the self-determination of the Palestinian people. With 168 positive votes, 8 abstentions, and 6 votes against, the United Nations plenary passed a resolution in favor of the Palestinian people, recognizing the nation's right to self-determination. In this regard, the Palestinian Foreign Minister Raed al-Maliki highlighted during the day that the widespread ratification of this measure demonstrates the overwhelming global support for the Palestinian cause in the midst of the continued repressive actions of Israel's occupation forces against the Palestinian people. After a fire at a shopping mall in Istanbul this Friday, Turkish authorities continued investigating the causes of the incident. The fire department disclosed the fire started on the roof of a company building and was controlled thanks to the intervention of a large number of its personnel. Authorities also reported no injuries or human losses, together with the evacuation of all visitors and workers from the establishment. They also emphasized that security agencies remained in the area investigating the causes of the fire. And difficult living conditions for Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Some 90% of refugee families need humanitarian assistance to survive. This information was issued on Friday by the United Nations Refugee Agency, the World Food Program, and the UN Children's Fund. The statement added that Syrian children and adolescents are the most affected by Lebanon's economic crisis. The agency's assessments show that children's nutrition is at stake, with less than half of infants under 5 months of age being exclusively breastfed, and only 11% meeting the minimum number of meals and food groups per day. Jordanians took to the streets on Friday, and activists called for more protests over fuel price rises that have added to a cost of living squeeze a day after riots in a southern city left one police officer dead. The authorities said the policeman was killed on Thursday by a gunshot fired by an unidentified individual when armed officers entered a neighborhood of Man to quell riots. Tensions have mounted in Man and several other cities in southern Jordan, especially after days of truck driver strikes protesting high fuel prices and demanding cuts in diesel prices. The Iranian government says they consider the resolution adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on human rights in Iran as devoid of legitimacy. In a statement read by Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Nasser Kanani, Iranian authorities referred to the resolution entitled Human Rights Situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran as anti-Iranian resolution. And on Friday, Japan's government approved a major defense policy reform, including a significant spending hike, as it perceives China poses a great strategic challenge to its security. It is the largest defense shakeup in decades. Japan vowed to increase security spending to up to 2% of its gross domestic product by 2027, reshaping its military command and acquiring long-range missiles. This brings the country in line with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization member guidelines. And just as the hearts of millions of fans live the emotions of the Qatar 2022 World Cup, teleSUR joins the sporting event with From the Field, a show that brings news, analysis, reviews, and more to our audience. Don't miss it. Our show airs at 1 p.m. local time Caracas, 12 p.m. New York. Remember, From the Field only on teleSUR. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also be sure to follow us on our socials. We're on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram as well. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Until next time.